The night was freezing, the kind of cold that bites through layers and steals your breath. In the small town of Moorhead, Minnesota, a man left a bar dressed for a short walk, carrying nothing but his coat and his secrets. He was expected home, yet he never arrived. Weeks before, strange phone calls had haunted his family, threats, warnings, voices that vanished as mysteriously as he would. The snow drifted quietly, masking the impossible. No sign of struggle, no trace of passage, no clue left behind. Investigators pieced together fragments, rumors of dangerous encounters at work, whispers of people who wanted him gone, but nothing concrete. Over 50 years later, his disappearance remains unsolved, a cold case that taunts with more questions than answers. We follow the trail, examine the chilling possibilities, and confront a mystery that refuses to yield its secrets. He was 30 years old, married with 2 young children, living a life that appeared ordinary but held subtle tensions just beneath the surface. Friends described him as reliable, dedicated, and quietly ambitious. Yet, those who worked with him sometimes whispered about the intensity he carried, the way he absorbed the weight of responsibility until it pressed on him like a second skin. His profession demanded discretion, patience, and meticulous attention to detail, traits that earned him respect, but also occasional resentment. In the weeks leading up to his disappearance, coworkers noticed changes in his demeanor, a distant gaze, abrupt shifts in mood, a sense that he was being watched, or worse, followed. Small incidents, seemingly mundane at first, began to accumulate into a pattern of unease. Doors left unlocked, misplaced items, calls at odd hours with voices that vanished before he could respond. Family life offered no sanctuary from this undercurrent of tension. His young wife, barely out of her teens when they married, relied heavily on him, and the children clung to his presence with the innocent intensity only young ones possess. Yet late-night conversations revealed hints of fear, quiet murmurs of unease, worries that were never fully articulated but hung in the air like a storm about to break. Threatening phone calls had arrived intermittently, brief but chilling, suggesting that someone, somewhere, had taken a keen interest in his movements, in his choices. Each call ended abruptly, leaving behind an eerie silence that was almost worse than words. Those closest to him felt the weight of danger pressing in, though no one could identify its source. At work, tension ran high. He had recently stepped away from several cases that involved sensitive financial disputes, clients who had reacted with disproportionate anger when their expectations were denied. Colleagues spoke quietly about confrontations that skirted violence, the edge of danger lurking just out of sight, yet no one could prove a direct threat. Rumors swirled. A client had brandished a knife in a hallway, tempers flared over denied claims, and shadows of intimidation followed him through office corridors. Despite these warnings, there was nothing tangible, no threats in writing, no arrests, no evidence. Just a growing sense of foreboding, the kind that gnaws at the mind in the dead of night. Even the simplest routines became fraught with tension. Walking home, driving to run errands, answering the phone, all were now accompanied by a heightened awareness, a cautious glance over the shoulder. It was as if invisible eyes were tracking every step, every choice. Neighbors later recalled noticing him pause mid-stride in the street, staring into the darkness as though calculating threats no one else could see. Friends who spoke with him in the days before he vanished remarked on his agitation, his insistence on checking locks, confirming plans, and making sure the children were safely tucked away. These seemingly ordinary precautions now read like premonitions, warnings of a storm that would arrive suddenly, without mercy. The paradox was striking. He was a man bound by family and routine, someone whose life offered comfort and stability, yet simultaneously shadowed by danger that seemed to exist just beyond comprehension. Observers now wonder how a life so anchored could unravel so completely in a matter of hours, leaving nothing but questions in its wake. Was it an accident waiting to happen, a misstep on a frigid night, or did something darker intervene? A calculated act designed to erase him from existence without leaving a trace. Even within his community, subtle signs of unease had been overlooked. Casual conversations hinted at disputes, minor disagreements that hinted at underlying tensions, exchanges that felt ordinary at the moment, but in retrospect suggested that he may have been navigating peril hidden in plain sight. Patterns emerge only when viewed through the lens of hindsight. And now every detail, the small nods of concern, the inexplicable silences, the fleeting glances, takes on a sinister weight. As the story unfolds, it becomes clear that this was not merely the tale of a man disappearing into the night. It was the narrative of a life under pressure, a web of relationships and encounters that created a precarious existence. Every seemingly insignificant interaction now raises questions. Was this a warning, a signal, a veiled threat, or was it coincidence, a series of ordinary events colliding in extraordinary ways? Each clue, each fragment of testimony adds layers to a puzzle that remains unsolved, challenging investigators, confounding families, and leaving the world to wonder how a life so carefully constructed could vanish without a trace, leaving only whispers and unanswered questions in its wake. The night was bitterly cold, the kind that makes the air itself feel like shards of ice pressing against skin. The streets of Moorhead were nearly empty, streetlights casting dim pools of yellow onto snow that had begun to drift lazily across the sidewalks. Inside the bar, laughter and clinking glasses masked the harsh wind outside. Patrons lingered over their drinks, unaware of the choices that would mark the night forever. He finished his drink, paid the tab, and stepped into the freezing darkness. The walk home was only a few miles, a distance he had traveled countless times. But that evening, something felt different. Observers would later recount subtle details, the way his coat was buttoned, the way he paused as if listening to something just beyond human perception, the faint shiver that seemed less about cold and more about anticipation. The temperature that night hovered around -8 degrees Celsius, with gusts cutting through any attempt to stay warm. Anyone venturing out without proper preparation would risk serious hypothermia, even death. Taxi services were available, yet he chose to walk alone. The decision struck investigators as incomprehensible. Why leave the safety of the bar to traverse dangerous terrain in near-lethal cold? No one could answer that question definitively. Footprints, tire tracks, or any sign of passage that might indicate where he went vanished as quickly as he disappeared, leaving behind only the cold night and an eerie silence. As he disappeared into the shadows, the timeline of events grew hazy. Witnesses recalled fleeting glimpses, a silhouette passing under a streetlight, a coat flapping in the wind, but no one could say with certainty where he went. Investigators reconstructed the route, noting its potential hazards. Icy patches, uneven sidewalks, open fields with no streetlights, and stretches where the snow could easily obscure even a single footprint. The path was treacherous, and yet, for reasons unknown, he had embarked on it alone. Complicating matters were the strange phone calls that had plagued his family in the weeks prior. Threats and warnings had arrived sporadically, the voices on the line often cutting off mid-sentence, leaving questions suspended in the air. These calls had ceased the very night he vanished. Some theorized that someone had been waiting for him to step out into the cold, a trap set with terrifying precision. Others suggested he may have sensed the danger and left intentionally, attempting to evade an unseen threat. Each possibility carried chilling implications, yet none could be verified. Investigators scrutinized the bar itself. Patrons and staff remembered the evening vividly. Laughter, camaraderie, and casual conversations. Yet beneath the surface, subtle interactions hinted at tension. Quick glances, whispered warnings, a fleeting moment of hesitation before stepping outside. Something had shifted in those final moments. Something intangible, yet profoundly consequential. The investigation would later focus on these minutiae, searching for patterns in gestures, unspoken words, and behaviors that might reveal why he never returned. The walk from the bar, short in distance but monumental in consequence, became the focal point of the case. Every intersection, every darkened alley, and every stretch of snow-covered road was meticulously examined. Theories emerged. Did he succumb to the cold, becoming lost in an unforgiving environment? Or was there a more sinister force at work, waiting just beyond the glow of the street lamps? Search parties scoured the route, combing the surrounding fields and backroads, yet found nothing. No footprints, no discarded items, no trace of his passage. The night had swallowed him completely. In the end, the combination of deadly cold, isolation, and unexplained circumstances created a perfect storm of mystery. Each factor alone might have been survivable, but together they formed a puzzle that defied logic. Investigators could not explain how a man familiar with the area, cautious by nature and otherwise predictable in his routines, could vanish so completely. The enigma of that night lingered in the minds of law enforcement and the community alike, raising questions that remain unanswered. Every detail, from the last sip of drink to the invisible steps into the snow, became a thread in a case that continues to haunt decades later, compelling anyone who hears the story to ask the same question: what truly happened in the deadly cold of Moorhead that night? Weeks before he disappeared, the quiet rhythm of family life had been shattered by a series of phone calls that carried a weight far heavier than the words themselves. Each ring brought a spike of anxiety, a brief electric tension that seemed to crawl beneath the skin. The voices on the other end were fleeting, distorted at times, delivering fragmented threats or cryptic warnings before vanishing into static. Sometimes there was silence, followed by a click that ended the conversation before a single sentence could be completed. His wife and children were left trembling in the wake of these disturbances, unsure whether the menace was imagined or real. Investigators later noted that such calls are often the hallmark of targeted intimidation, designed to unsettle, to manipulate, and sometimes to orchestrate outcomes that are almost impossible to anticipate. The pattern of calls grew erratic, unpredictable, yet unmistakably focused. They arrived at hours when he might have been alone, when the night pressed most heavily against the windows of the house, and the children slept unaware. He tried to trace them, contacted phone companies, and discussed strategies with coworkers. Yet the technology of the era offered little recourse. Each investigation yielded nothing. No phone numbers, no traces of origin, only the faint memory of the voice, leaving more questions than answers. Those brief interruptions of silence and static became part of the tapestry of tension that surrounded him, as if a presence unseen was orchestrating each moment with careful deliberation. When he vanished, the calls stopped abruptly. The sudden silence was eerie, almost deliberate, suggesting that the intended purpose had been fulfilled. Was this the work of someone who had been monitoring him for weeks, calculating the precise moment to strike, or had he taken measures that neutralized the threat in ways no one could understand? Investigators considered both possibilities, weighing each against the backdrop of his disappearance, realizing that the cessation of calls could signify completion, retreat, or an unseen shift in circumstances. Each scenario carried a chilling resonance. The calls were not random. They were a signal, a harbinger, a puzzle piece that, when removed, left a void as profound as the missing man himself. Family members recalled the fear that permeated every room in the house during those weeks. Even ordinary activities, preparing dinner, checking on the children, walking from room to room, were infused with tension. Each phone ring sparked immediate alarm, a rush of adrenaline that left hearts racing and hands trembling. The psychological toll was immense, leaving them hypervigilant and aware of their surroundings in ways that only those under true threat could understand. Investigators recognized this state as both a symptom and a clue. The extreme anxiety underscored that the danger was tangible, not imagined. Yet the absence of physical evidence complicated every lead, leaving the family and law enforcement alike frustrated and wary of every shadow, every creak, every whisper of the wind outside. Law enforcement interviewed neighbors, coworkers, and anyone who might have interacted with him during the critical weeks. Each account contained fragments of information: overheard warnings, strange visitors, brief encounters with people who seemed unusually interested in his routine. Yet nothing was concrete. The trail twisted in multiple directions, some paths leading to dead ends, others hinting at dangerous possibilities that could not be substantiated. Even among those closest to him, there were questions that could not be answered. Who was making the calls? What was their ultimate intention? Why did the harassment cease at the precise moment he disappeared? The calls, when viewed in isolation, might have seemed like ordinary harassment or a prank gone too far. But in the context of his sudden disappearance, their significance became impossible to ignore. The investigation now focused on correlating timing, content, and psychological impact, searching for connections that might reveal motive or identity. Every unanswered question intensified the urgency, and every fragment of recollection became a critical clue. Investigators faced the difficult task of reconstructing a sequence that existed almost entirely in memory and inference, piecing together a psychological landscape as treacherous and elusive as the frozen roads he walked that night. As the story unfolds, the silence left by the missing calls becomes almost louder than the threats themselves. It is a silence filled with implication, a void that challenges every assumption, defies every theory, and haunts the minds of those who search for the truth. The abrupt cessation, the sudden disappearance, and the lingering fear converge into a chilling reality. Some mysteries are defined not only by what is present, but by what vanishes without explanation. Each unanswered question becomes a thread, pulling investigators deeper into the enigma, demanding that every possibility be considered and every shadow be examined. The story of those calls is the story of a warning, a menace, and a disappearance that refuses to be understood, leaving the world to confront the unsettling reality that not all threats announce themselves before vanishing into the cold night. His work had always demanded a careful balance between diligence and discretion, but in the months before he vanished, that balance teetered dangerously. As an insurance adjuster, he handled claims that often involved significant sums of money, emotions running high, and clients unwilling to accept any outcome short of complete satisfaction. While most interactions were routine, a few had escalated beyond simple disagreement. Colleagues recalled a tense encounter in which a client, enraged over a denied claim, had brandished a knife, forcing him to retreat without incident, but leaving a lingering sense of vulnerability. That moment, seemingly isolated, became a focal point for investigators trying to understand potential motives, a single spark in a tinderbox of unverified threats and whispered warnings. There were hints that his professionalism had occasionally clashed with powerful or influential individuals who saw his decisions as personal affronts. Rumors swirled about confrontations that never reached legal documentation. Arguments overheard in parking lots, menacing stares in office corridors, cryptic notes slipped under doors. Each incident, while minor on its own, contributed to an atmosphere of tension that suggested his work had created enemies who might resort to extreme measures. Investigators pieced together these fragments, aware that any of them could have been the tipping point leading to his disappearance. Witnesses remembered unusual behaviors in the weeks leading up to the event. He was more vigilant, double-checking appointments, locking doors with unusual thoroughness, and hesitating when stepping outside. Friends noted a cautious demeanor, almost as if he sensed an invisible presence tracking his every move. At work, colleagues sensed his distraction. His focus wavered between routine tasks and an underlying concern that someone might be observing or waiting. These subtle changes painted a portrait of a man aware of potential danger but uncertain of its source, trapped in a web of suspicion that extended beyond what anyone could prove. Investigators explored every possible link between his professional conflicts and potential threats to his safety. They examined client lists, payment disputes, and contentious claims, seeking patterns that could indicate a targeted attack. Some leads were intriguing but ultimately inconclusive. Anonymous notes, veiled threats, and unexplained encounters that vanished before further inquiry. Each thread held promise, yet every attempt to connect it to his disappearance ended in frustration. The absence of concrete evidence complicated the case, forcing detectives to rely on conjecture and the subtle cues left in his behavior and the recollections of those around him. The dangerous potential of his profession was compounded by the isolation inherent in his personal life. The protective shield of family and routine was insufficient against threats that operated outside the bounds of ordinary expectation. Colleagues, friends, and neighbors recalled moments that now seemed ominous. The quiet glance over the shoulder, the unexplained urgency to leave certain locations, the sudden avoidance of familiar streets. These behaviors, once considered mundane or incidental, assumed a weight of significance in the context of a disappearance that defied explanation. Each instance hinted at a confrontation that might have occurred, a decision made, or a danger narrowly avoided, yet no witness could confirm what transpired. The complexity of his work-related interactions highlights the challenge investigators faced in differentiating between coincidence and cause. Every angry client, every unresolved dispute, and every tense encounter was a potential lead. But without tangible evidence, the risk of misinterpretation loomed large. Detectives had to consider multiple scenarios simultaneously: a confrontation gone wrong, a targeted abduction, or even the possibility that he was forced to disappear by someone who understood his routines and vulnerabilities. Each hypothesis carried implications as chilling as they were speculative, underscoring the difficulty of navigating a case in which motive existed, yet proof remained elusive. Even decades later, the shadow cast by his professional life continues to intrigue and unsettle. The notion that routine decisions, declining a claim, adhering to policy, maintaining integrity, might have painted a target on his back adds a layer of tension to the mystery. It invites viewers to consider the unseen consequences of everyday choices and to question how much danger might lurk behind ordinary responsibilities. In examining the intersection of work, threat, and disappearance, the story unfolds like a labyrinth, revealing that sometimes the most familiar paths conceal the deadliest hazards. The trail of his professional life, filled with potential enemies and unexplained confrontations, becomes a central thread in a case that challenges perception, defies easy explanation, and continues to demand answers that remain just out of reach. From the moment he vanished, the search for him became an exercise in frustration, hope, and mounting dread. Local law enforcement mobilized quickly, scouring streets, alleys, and the surrounding snow-covered fields, but each sweep yielded nothing beyond faint footprints that dissolved in the frost, animal tracks that misled searchers, and glimpses of shadows in the corner of the eye. Volunteers combed the area, calling his name into the wind, their voices swallowed by the icy night. Helicopters scoured open landscapes, their spotlights slicing through darkness, yet no definitive trace emerged. Each failed attempt amplified the mystery, turning what should have been a straightforward missing person case into a puzzle of ever-increasing complexity. In 1977, a breakthrough, or so it seemed, stirred the hopes of everyone involved. A body was discovered in a remote field, partially buried under snow and debris, sparking a wave of anticipation among family members and investigators alike. Initial signs suggested the remains could belong to him. Clothing fragments vaguely similar, the location consistent with potential routes home, and the chilling thought that the night had claimed its victim. Yet, forensic analysis revealed a devastating truth. The remains were not his. The hope that had briefly illuminated the grim search was extinguished, leaving only disappointment and renewed questions about what truly had occurred that night. 2 decades later, in 1997, another lead emerged. Additional skeletal remains were uncovered near a remote riverbank, partially concealed under overgrowth and sediment. Once again, investigators wondered if fate had finally revealed its answer. Family and friends held their breath as forensic teams conducted painstaking examinations, analyzing bones for identification markers, personal effects, and any signs of trauma. Yet the result mirrored the earlier false hope. The remains belonged to someone else entirely. With each discovery that failed to solve the mystery, the trail of certainty grew colder, and the sense of helplessness intensified. The case was no longer simply about finding a missing person. It had become a study in absence itself, an investigation into the patterns left behind by someone who had seemingly evaporated from the physical world. Despite these setbacks, investigators refused to abandon the search. Every lead was pursued, no matter how tenuous. Reports of sightings, faint tracks in snow-covered fields, and mysterious shadows along rural roads were meticulously documented. Each piece of information required careful cross-examination. The witness recollection, the weather conditions that could distort perception, the time lapse between the disappearance and any claimed sighting. In many instances, accounts were conflicting, creating a labyrinth of possibilities that often led nowhere. Yet each report held the tantalizing promise of a breakthrough, however fleeting or improbable, keeping the investigative momentum alive. The emotional toll on family members was immense, as hope and despair alternated in cruel cycles. Days that began with anticipation often ended in disappointment, and nights were filled with restless imagining of what might have occurred. Letters, photographs, and keepsakes became symbols of persistence, their significance magnified by the unresolved absence. Investigators noted how the human mind clings to fragments of potential resolution, sometimes embellishing reality in the desire for closure. Each false lead, each mistaken identification forced both family and law enforcement to confront the fragility of certainty, highlighting the deep challenges inherent in unraveling a case shrouded in silence and disappearing footprints. Over time, the methodology of searches evolved. Ground-penetrating radar, systematic grid searches, and coordinated volunteer efforts attempted to cover every conceivable area he could have traversed. Environmental challenges, the biting cold, snowdrifts, and uneven terrain compounded the difficulty, sometimes erasing any trace of movement before it could be recorded. The landscape itself became both a foe and a canvas for speculation, where the natural erasure of evidence made every discovery uncertain. Each investigation illuminated new areas, yet consistently led back to the same chilling realization. The missing man had left almost no physical trace of his existence beyond memory and speculation. Through these decades of searches and near discoveries, a haunting question persisted. Was he lost to the elements, or had something far more deliberate intervened? The interplay of hope and disappointment became central to the narrative, illustrating the duality of human persistence and the cruelty of unresolved mystery. Every false lead, every unconfirmed sighting, and every body that did not belong to him compounded the enigma, leaving investigators, family, and community with a profound sense of unease. The case evolved into a testament to uncertainty, a chronicle of efforts thwarted by circumstance, and a sobering reminder that some disappearances do not yield answers, only echoes that resonate decades after the event. The question that haunted investigators, family, and the small town alike was deceptively simple. Did he disappear by chance, or was he deliberately erased from the world around him? On the surface, both possibilities seemed plausible, yet neither offered a satisfying explanation. The environment alone, the frigid December night, the snow-covered roads, the isolation of his route, could have claimed him. Hypothermia, disorientation, and the sheer unforgiving nature of winter could have led to a fatal accident. Yet every forensic and eyewitness clue, or lack thereof, chipped away at that theory. No footprints persisted, no signs of struggle, no objects left behind. The night itself seemed to conspire against discovery, erasing all evidence of movement, presence, or conflict. Yet the circumstances surrounding his life suggested that natural causes were far from the only explanation. Weeks of threatening phone calls, unexplained encounters, and subtle signs of tension hinted at the possibility of deliberate intervention. Investigators had to reconcile the notion that someone might have been observing him, manipulating his movements, and ultimately ensuring he vanished without a trace. The abrupt cessation of those menacing calls the night he disappeared added a layer of chilling plausibility to this theory. It was as if an unseen force had orchestrated the events with precision, allowing no margin for error, leaving only silence in its wake. The possibility of foul play was explored through countless interviews, analysis of behavioral patterns, and reconstruction of potential scenarios. Investigators considered who might benefit from his disappearance, which individuals had motive, opportunity, and the awareness of his routines necessary to execute such an act. Yet the case was confounded by the absence of physical evidence. Motives were clear only in theory: professional disputes, angry clients, or unknown adversaries. No threats had been recorded in writing, no suspicious encounters confirmed, no surveillance captured. The ambiguity made every theory compelling, yet impossible to prove, forcing the investigation into a precarious balancing act between probability and speculation. Psychologists consulted on the case noted that disappearances often carry a dual narrative: the external factors, such as environment or conflict, and the internal ones, including stress, fear, and decision-making under pressure. His behavior leading up to that night suggested awareness of danger, hesitation, repeated checks of locks, careful navigation of streets. Yet no one could determine whether these precautions were sufficient or entirely misdirected. Each step he took, each choice made in that final hours, became a puzzle piece in a larger, incomprehensible picture. The interplay between caution and vulnerability created a tension that remains palpable decades later, leaving room for endless conjecture. As investigators examined every potential lead, patterns emerged that were as perplexing as they were alarming. Reports of unusual vehicles near his usual routes, sightings of unfamiliar individuals, and cryptic accounts of overheard conversations created a web of possibilities. Yet each thread dissolved under scrutiny, evidence either non-existent or inconsistent, raising more questions than answers. The absence of a body, personal effects, or clear trace meant that reconstruction relied heavily on circumstantial elements, behavioral inference, and the faintest clues left by others. Every scenario, from accidental death to calculated abduction, was plausible, yet none could be confirmed, leaving a chilling uncertainty hanging over every conclusion. The tension between disappearance and destruction illustrates the complexity of a case that defies conventional resolution. Natural causes, environmental hazards, and human intervention each intersect in ways that make definitive answers elusive. Each hypothesis must account not only for the physical disappearance, but also for the psychological, social, and situational context surrounding it. Investigators found themselves caught in a paradox. The more they analyzed, the more variables emerged, and the more opaque the truth became. Ultimately, the line between voluntary disappearance and external destruction is almost impossible to define in this case. Every lead points in multiple directions at once, every clue invites interpretation, and every absence speaks louder than any witness testimony. The night of his vanishing remains a stage set with shadows, uncertainty, and unanswered questions. It forces those who study it to confront the limits of perception, the elusiveness of truth, and the unnerving possibility that some disappearances are neither random nor accidental. They are deliberate, executed with an efficiency that leaves no trail, no evidence, and no resolution. In contemplating what truly occurred, the question lingers. Was it a man lost to the night, or was he removed in a way that ensured the night would swallow him whole? Years passed, and the absence became a presence of its own, a constant, haunting reminder of a life abruptly severed from the world without explanation. In 1979, after nearly 8 years of searching, hoping, and speculating, he was legally declared dead. There was no body, no confirmation, only the grim necessity of paperwork to provide closure for family, insurance, and the cold mechanics of law. The declaration did not resolve the mystery. It formalized the disappearance, but the questions, suspicions, and fears persisted, lingering like frost in the memory of those left behind. Friends, neighbors, and investigators all grappled with the paradox. How could someone vanish so completely, leaving no physical trace, yet leave an indelible mark on the minds of everyone who knew him? Even decades later, the case remains a labyrinth of uncertainty. Every search effort, every tip, every partial clue only deepened the enigma. The discovery of bones in remote locations, the fleeting sightings reported by passers-by, and the whispered rumors of unknown parties with hidden motives all contributed to an atmosphere thick with suspense and ambiguity. Each lead sparked brief surges of hope, only to collapse under scrutiny or forensic analysis, leaving behind the same haunting emptiness that had defined his disappearance from the start. Family members lived with a mixture of grief and suspicion, the legal declaration offering no solace, only a recognition that a chapter had ended without explanation. Investigators never stopped tracing shadows. They revisited old leads, scoured records, and consulted experts, always looking for that single detail capable of breaking the case wide open. Even the smallest anomaly, a fleeting recollection of a strange vehicle, an unexplained sound on the night of his disappearance, or the timing of an abandoned call, was examined with painstaking scrutiny. The tools of investigation evolved over the decades, yet the absence of physical evidence remained an unyielding barrier. Every hypothesis, accidental death, voluntary disappearance, or deliberate abduction, had strengths and weaknesses, none providing certainty, all inviting speculation. The legal closure offered by declaring him dead contrasted sharply with the ongoing psychological and investigative realities. For family and friends, life continued, marked by anniversaries of disappearance, holidays shadowed by uncertainty, and the unending cycle of what-ifs. For law enforcement, the case became a testament to the limits of investigative reach and the persistence of unresolved mysteries. Each unanswered question, why did the threatening calls stop? Who might have had motive or opportunity? What truly occurred on that bitterly cold night remained embedded in files, notebooks, and memories, a constellation of clues without a connecting star. Public fascination with the case persisted, fueled by the chilling circumstances and the stubborn refusal of the mystery to resolve. Cold case enthusiasts, amateur sleuths, and journalists examined the events with fresh eyes, reinterpreting old evidence and speculating on new scenarios. The combination of human error, environmental obstacles, and potential malevolent intent created a story that was compelling, terrifying, and frustratingly incomplete. Every discussion, every documentary segment, every analysis added layers to the narrative, keeping the mystery alive and reminding the world that not all disappearances conclude with answers. Even without a body, without footprints, without a definitive resolution, the disappearance shaped lives, communities, and investigations. It serves as a stark reminder that absence can be as powerful as presence, that what is unseen can provoke deeper fear and fascination than any confirmed reality. The story continues to resonate precisely because of its gaps, its uncertainties, and the tension between what is known and what will never be proven. Ultimately, the case defies closure. The declaration of death is a bureaucratic artifact, a line drawn in documents, but it does not capture the haunting essence of disappearance, the fear, the speculation, the enduring suspense. It asks those who encounter the story to confront the limits of understanding, to grapple with the unsettling truth that some people are removed from life not with sound or evidence, but with silence. And so, decades after that freezing night, the question persists. Was he lost to chance, taken by someone, or did he vanish by choice? The answer remains elusive. The cold case, a shadowy testament to the mysteries that refuse to yield, leaving only the echoes of a life declared dead but never truly found.